Mother Bear, tied to the tree, begged for help as the small child approached. What happened next put everyone in tears and changed Pine Valley forever. Let us know where you're watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe if stories of compassion touch your heart. The golden light of late afternoon filtered through the dense canopy of Pine Valley Forest, casting dappled shadows across the narrow dirt path that wound between ancient trees. The air carried the sweet scent of pine needles warmed by the summer sun, mingled with the earthy aroma of moss and fallen leaves. Birds called to one another high above, their melodies creating a natural symphony that normally brought peace to anyone fortunate enough to hear it. Today, however, the forest tranquility was shattered by urgent voices and the sound of hurried footsteps converging on a small clearing half a mile from the edge of town. Megan Foster adjusted her 7-month-old son Jamie in her arms as she followed her husband Ryan along the increasingly crowded path. The baby gurgled happily, oblivious to the tension that had drawn nearly half the residents of Pine Valley from their homes and into the woods on this Tuesday afternoon. Megan had been hanging laundry in their backyard when she'd heard the commotion. Neighbors calling to one another, car doors slamming, and the unmistakable sound of excitement spreading through their usually quiet mountain community. "We should turn back," Megan said, touching Ryan's arm as they approached a bottleneck where the path narrowed between two massive boulders. Ahead, she could see people squeezing through the gap and emerging into what appeared to be a clearing filled with more Pine Valley residents. Taking a baby to see whatever's happening doesn't seem like a good idea. Ryan hesitated, torn between his wife's reasonable concern and his own curiosity. A high school biology teacher with a lifelong passion for wildlife, he had overheard fragments about a bear that had been terrorizing local properties. "Let's just take a quick look," he suggested. "We'll stay at the back of the crowd. If it seems unsafe for Jamie, we'll head straight home." Reluctantly, Megan nodded. Jamie bounced in her arms, his wide blue eyes taking in the unusual number of people around him. His tiny fingers clutched at Megan's cotton blouse as they squeezed through the narrow passage between the boulders and emerged into a sun-dappled clearing. What Megan saw made her instinctively pull Jamie closer to her chest. In the center of the clearing, bound tightly to an enormous pine tree with thick yellow ropes, was a massive brown bear. The animal's fur was matted and dirty, with patches missing where it had clearly struggled against its bindings. The ropes had been wound multiple times around the bear's neck, torso, and all 4 legs, securing it so firmly to the trunk that it could barely move more than a few inches in any direction. Despite its fearsome potential, the bear made no aggressive sounds, only watching the gathering humans with dark eyes that seemed to hold an almost human-like awareness and suffering. "They caught it behind the miller's farm this morning," said a voice beside them. Megan turned to see Walter Green, the owner of the local hardware store, speaking in hushed tones to no one in particular. "Been causing havoc for weeks now. Raided 4 chicken coops, damaged property. Sheriff thinks it's the same one that chased the Dawson kids last week when they were playing at the creek." The bear's head hung low, its breathing labored and raspy. The ropes around its neck seemed cruelly tight, cutting into the flesh visible beneath its fur, despite being a wild predator capable of killing a human with a single swipe of its massive paws. There was something undeniably pitiful about the creature's current state. Megan felt an unexpected twist of empathy, quickly followed by confusion about her own reaction. This was, after all, a dangerous animal that had been threatening their community. "What are they planning to do with it?" she asked Walter, keeping her voice low, as if the bear might understand their conversation. Walter adjusted his worn baseball cap and sighed. "Wildlife Service has been called. Ranger Thompson says they're about an hour out, got delayed dealing with a wildfire situation up north." He paused, lowering his voice further. "Some folks want it relocated, but others..." His meaning was clear without finishing the sentence. Around the clearing, Megan could see the division among her neighbors. Most kept a respectful distance from the restrained animal, their expressions a mix of curiosity, fear, and in some cases, anger. Mayor Richard Edwards stood with Sheriff Cooper and several members of the town council, deep in serious conversation. Flashlight beams crossed as people adjusted their positions, creating an eerie, theatrical illumination as shadows lengthened across the forest floor with the sinking sun. Jamie began to fuss in Megan's arms, his small face scrunching up as he sensed the unusual tension in the air. She bounced him gently, making soothing sounds close to his ear. "It's okay, sweetie," she whispered, though the words felt hollow. Nothing about this scene felt okay to her. As Jamie's whimpers increased, Megan noticed something strange. The bear's eyes, which had been moving listlessly across the crowd, suddenly fixed on them, or more specifically on Jamie. The animal's gaze sharpened, focusing intently on the crying infant. A chill ran down Megan's spine, not from fear exactly, but from the uncanny sense of recognition in that gaze. "Ryan," she murmured, nudging her husband, who was deep in conversation with Walter about wildlife management practices. "Ryan, look at the bear." Ryan turned, following her gaze to the bound animal. The bear had straightened slightly against its restraints, its attention completely focused on their baby. Before Ryan could comment, the crowd's murmuring grew louder as Frank Dawson pushed his way to the front. Frank's weathered face was flushed with anger, his finger jabbing the air as he addressed Sheriff Cooper. "This beast has been terrorizing our properties for months." Frank's voice carried clearly across the clearing. "My kids can't even play in our own yard anymore. I've lost 12 chickens and had my storage shed torn apart twice." Dr. Carol Wilson, the local veterinarian, stepped forward in response. Though in her 60s, Carol carried herself with the strength and certainty of someone half her age. Her grey hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her eyes flashed with indignation behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Look at how those ropes are cutting into her," Carol argued, gesturing toward the bear. "She can barely breathe. This is no way to treat any living creature, regardless of what it's done." The debate erupted among the townsfolk, voices rising as people took sides. Through it all, the bear remained silent, its gaze now shifting between Jamie and something beyond the crowd. Following the animal's line of sight, Megan noticed for the first time a small movement in the underbrush, about 30 feet away, near the edge of the clearing. "Ryan," she whispered urgently, "I think there's something over there." She nodded toward the rustling foliage. "The bear keeps looking in that direction." Ryan squinted, then his eyes widened with understanding. "There's a cub," he said, his voice barely audible. That explains everything. The realization hit Megan like a physical force. This wasn't just a bear, it was a mother, separated from her young. The sudden understanding transformed her perception of the situation entirely. She looked at the suffering animal with new eyes, seeing not a mindless predator, but a parent desperately concerned for her offspring. The parallel between them, two mothers, one human and one bear, struck her with unexpected force. Jamie chose that moment to let out a particularly loud wail, his patience exhausted by the prolonged tension and strange surroundings. The sound cut through the heated debate, causing several people to glance irritably in their direction, but it was the bear's reaction that stunned Megan. The creature made a soft huffing sound, straining against the ropes as if trying to move toward the crying baby. "There's a cub," Megan said, her voice stronger than she expected. "Over there in the bushes. That's why she's been coming near homes. She's trying to feed her baby." Several heads turned to look where she was pointing. Conversation momentarily paused. Carol Wilson was the first to move, carefully approaching the spot Megan had indicated. Peering into the undergrowth, the veterinarian's face softened. "She's right," Carol confirmed, straightening up. "There's a cub here. Looks about 4 months old. It's trying to hide." The revelation rippled through the crowd, changing the energy of the gathering. Even Frank Dawson's expression shifted slightly, the hardness in his eyes softening as he processed this new information. Sheriff Cooper moved toward Carol, his hand still resting cautiously on his holster. "That explains the aggressive behavior," Ryan said, addressing the gathering with the confident tone he used when teaching. "Female bears with cubs are notoriously protective. And if she was struggling to find enough natural food sources, especially with the drought we've had this summer," Mayor Edwards nodded thoughtfully. "So she wasn't specifically targeting properties out of aggression. She was desperate to feed her cub." As the adults discussed this new development, something unexpected happened. Jamie, who had been fussing continuously, suddenly went quiet in Megan's arms. His wide blue eyes were fixed on the bear with an intensity that seemed impossible for a 7-month-old infant. Then, with surprising strength, he twisted in Megan's grip and reached both hands toward the restrained animal. "Bear," Jamie said clearly, his first recognizable word beyond mama and dada. A collective gasp rose from those close enough to hear. Megan stared at her son in astonishment. Jamie had never said bear before. They didn't even have picture books featuring bears at home. Yet here he was, identifying the animal perfectly and reaching toward it with what appeared to be concern rather than fear. "Bear sad," Jamie added, his face scrunching into a frown as he strained toward the suffering animal. The simplicity and accuracy of the baby's assessment struck Megan deeply. Out of the mouths of babes came the truth that adults had been too caught up in their own concerns to see clearly. Beyond fear, beyond property damage, beyond human inconvenience was simply a suffering creature in need of compassion. "He's right," Megan said, her voice cracking slightly with emotion. "We're so focused on what this bear did that we're ignoring what we're doing right now." She gestured toward the tightly bound animal, whose breathing had become increasingly labored during their discussion. "Those ropes around her neck are too tight. She's struggling to breathe." Carol Wilson nodded emphatically. "I've been trying to tell you all. If we don't loosen those restraints soon, particularly around her neck and chest, we might not have to worry about what to do with her at all." Sheriff Cooper checked his watch with a grimace. "Wildlife Service is still at least 40 minutes out. There was an accident on the mountain pass that's slowing them down." "We can't wait that long," Carol insisted, her medical training making her acutely aware of the bear's deteriorating condition. "She needs those ropes loosened now." Frank Dawson scoffed, crossing his arms defensively. "And who's going to do that? You? That animal could tear someone apart if it gets any freedom." "She's too weak to be dangerous," Carol countered, though uncertainty flickered across her face. The bear, while clearly suffering, still possessed powerful jaws and claws that could inflict deadly damage if it felt threatened. Throughout this exchange, Jamie had grown increasingly restless in Megan's arms. His tiny face had taken on an expression of determination that seemed impossibly mature for an infant. With his eyes still fixed on the bear, he repeated, "Bear sad, bear hurt." Megan looked between her son and the suffering animal, then followed. The bear's gaze to where the cub was partially visible in the underbrush. Something about Jamie's innocent empathy touched a chord within her. Children, she realized, often saw with a clarity that adults had long forgotten, unbiased by fear, prejudice, or past experiences. "Jamie's right," she said, her voice stronger now. "That's not just a nuisance animal, that's a mother separated from her baby." For several heartbeats, no one spoke. The only sounds were the rustling of leaves overhead, the bears labored, breathing, and somewhere in the distance, the faint call of a whippoorwill announcing the approach of evening. In that moment of silence, Megan felt something shift in the clearing, a collective realization that perhaps they had been approaching this situation all wrong from the beginning. Robert Mason, a retired park ranger who had lived in Pine Valley, For over 4 decades, pushed his way gently through the crowd. His weathered face was calm but serious as he surveyed the scene with experienced eyes. Despite being in his 70s, he moved with the confidence of someone who had spent a lifetime in these woods and understood their inhabitants better than most. "Megan's observation makes sense," he said, his deep voice cutting through the murmurs that had followed her statement. "This time of year, bear cubs are still highly dependent on their mothers. If food is scarce because of our drought, she'd take greater risks to feed her young." He approached the tree cautiously, maintaining a respectful distance from the bound animal while examining her condition. The bear's eyes tracked his movement, but there was no aggression in her gaze, only exhaustion and what appeared to be resignation. "Look at her ribs," Robert pointed out. "She's undernourished. Berry production this summer was less than half of normal because of the lack of rain. The streams are lower too, which means fewer fish. She's been struggling to survive." Carol Wilson moved to stand beside Robert, nodding in agreement. "The cub looks even worse, significantly underweight for this time of year. They should both be building fat reserves for winter by now." Frank Dawson shifted uncomfortably, his earlier anger visibly giving way to a more complex emotion as he processed this new perspective. "That doesn't change the fact that she's dangerous," he said, though his voice had lost some of its certainty. "My kids could have been hurt when she came onto our property." "She wasn't targeting your children, Frank," Robert explained patiently. "Bears generally avoid humans unless they're desperate or feel threatened. She was after food, not people." As the adults continued their discussion, Megan felt Jamie squirming with increasing determination in her arms. His small face was set with an expression of resolve that seemed impossible for a 7-month-old, his eyes never leaving the bound bear. "Mama," Jamie said, pulling at Megan's shirt. "Bear, help Bear." Ryan moved closer to his wife and son, concern etched on his face. "Maybe we should take him home now," he suggested quietly. "This is getting intense, and we don't know what's going to happen next." Before Megan could respond, Sheriff Cooper stepped forward, addressing the gathered townspeople. "Folks, I appreciate everyone's input, but we need to maintain order here. Wildlife Service will make the appropriate decision when they arrive. Until then, I need everyone to stay back at least 20 feet from the animal." A frustrated murmur ran through the crowd. The bear's breathing had become more labored during their debate, each inhale now accompanied by a faint wheezing sound. The ropes around her neck had visibly tightened as her struggling had subsided and her body had slumped further against the tree trunk. "She won't last 40 more minutes like this," Carol insisted, her medical training making her acutely aware of the deteriorating situation. "Look at her breathing pattern. She's struggling for air. Those ropes need to be loosened immediately, at least around her neck and chest." Mayor Edwards, who'd been listening silently, finally spoke. "Carol's right," he said, surprising. Many with his support. "We can't just let her suffer like this while we wait. Is there anyone here who knows how to safely adjust the restraints without fully releasing her?" Robert Mason nodded slowly. "I handled bear encounters during my 30 years as a ranger. I could try to loosen the ropes enough to ease her breathing, without giving her too much freedom of movement." "That's too risky," Sheriff Cooper objected. "If that bear gets even partially free and someone gets hurt, the liability would be enormous." "And if she dies while tied to that tree because we did nothing?" Carol challenged. "What kind of liability, moral liability, is that?" The debate might have continued indefinitely if not for what happened next. With a sudden burst of strength that caught Megan completely off guard, Jamie twisted in her arms and managed to slip free. Before anyone could react, the infant dropped to the ground and, with surprising coordination for a baby who had only recently mastered crawling, began, moving rapidly toward the bound bear. "Jamie!" Megan's heart-stopping cry echoed through the clearing as she lunged forward. Ryan moved even faster, but Sheriff Cooper caught him by the arm. "Don't make any sudden movements," the sheriff warned in a tense whisper. "You might startle the bear and make things worse." Time seemed to slow as the gathering watched in horror. Jamie, with the single-minded determination unique to small children, crawled directly toward the enormous predator. His tiny form made the bear appear even more massive by comparison, a 300-pound wild animal facing a 20-pound infant. The entire clearing fell silent. The only sounds, the crunching of leaves beneath Jamie's small hands and knees, and the raspy breathing of the bear. Even Frank Dawson stood frozen, his earlier arguments forgotten in the face of potential tragedy. Megan felt her legs trembling, barely able to support her weight as she watched her baby approach the bear. Every instinct screamed at her to rush forward and snatch him away, but the warnings about sudden movements kept her rooted in place, tears streaming down her face. The bear's eyes, which had been dulled with pain and resignation, suddenly sharpened as they focused on the approaching infant. Her massive head lifted slightly, tracking Jamie's movement with an intensity that was impossible to interpret. "Oh, God," Ryan whispered beside Megan, his voice cracking. "Please." When Jamie reached the tree, he pulled himself up to standing. By gripping the rough bark, now only inches away from the bear's face, the contrast was striking. A tiny human child before a creature that could end his life with a single movement. No one in the clearing dared breathe or move. Mayor Edwards had gone pale. Sheriff Cooper's hand hovered near his holster, and Carol Wilson pressed her fingers to her mouth. Even Robert Mason, with all his experience, looked deeply concerned. Then, with the innocent fearlessness that only a child could possess, Jamie reached out and placed his small hand on the bear's nose. "No cry, bear," he said clearly, his high voice carrying across the silent clearing. "Jamie, help." Megan thought her heart might stop completely. She reached blindly for Ryan's hand, gripping it with painful intensity as they watched their son touch a wild predator. Time stretched, each second an eternity, as they waited for the bear's reaction. What happened next defied all expectations. The bear, rather than showing aggression, closed her eyes briefly at Jamie's touch, as if accepting the small comfort offered. Then, to everyone's astonishment, Jamie turned his attention to the ropes around the bear's neck, his tiny fingers plucking ineffectually at the tight bindings. "Hurt, bear," he declared, looking back at the stunned adults with an expression that somehow managed to be both imploring and accusatory. "Fix." For several heartbeats, no one moved, the tableau before them too extraordinary to interrupt. A baby attempting to free a suffering predator with fingers too small and weak for the task. The pure compassion of the gesture struck everyone present with visceral force. Then Robert Mason moved forward, his steps slow and deliberate. "The boy, he sees what we've been arguing about," he said quietly, approaching Jamie with careful movements. "This isn't just about managing a nuisance animal, it's about showing basic decency to a living creature." Carol Wilson followed, medical bag in hand. "I'll check her condition if you can secure Jamie," she said to Robert, her professional demeanor. Returning as she focused on the immediate need, Robert gently lifted Jamie, speaking softly to the child as he did so. "That was very brave, little one, but let's let the grown-ups help now, okay?" Jamie didn't protest being picked up, but he kept, his eyes fixed on the bear, his small face solemn with concern. "Help, bear," he repeated firmly. Ryan rushed forward to reclaim his son, holding him tightly against his chest, while Megan embraced them both, tears flowing freely down her face. "Don't ever do that again," she whispered into Jamie's soft hair. Though her words lacked conviction, despite her terror, she couldn't help feeling a profound wonder at her child's fearlessness and compassion. "Bear sad," Jamie insisted, pointing back at the animal. "Bear baby sad." Carol was already examining the ropes, assessing how to loosen them without giving the bear enough freedom to pose a danger. "These restraints are much too tight," she reported. "She's developing abrasions where they've cut into her skin, and the restriction around her chest is seriously compromising her breathing." Robert turned to Sheriff Cooper. "Do you have a knife or scissors? Something to cut these ropes just enough to ease the pressure?" The sheriff hesitated, clearly torn between his duty to public safety and the suffering animal before him. The bear's eyes had reopened and were now moving between Jamie and the spot where her cub remained, partially hidden in the underbrush. Frank Dawson stepped forward, surprising everyone by reaching into his pocket and pulling out a folding knife. "Be careful," he said gruffly, handing it to Robert. "My kids love animals. They'd never forgive me if I just stood by." The atmosphere in the clearing had transformed completely. What had been fear and anger just minutes ago was now replaced by a tentative, fragile compassion ignited by a child too young to understand fear or prejudice. Jamie's simple act of trust and kindness had cut through years of tension between the townspeople and the wild creatures that shared their mountain home. Robert accepted the knife with a nod of thanks and turned to Carol. "I'll need your guidance on where to cut first. Start with the neck," she directed. "That's most critical for her breathing. Then we'll address the chest and limbs, but carefully. We want to ease her suffering, not give her enough freedom to bolt or lash out." As Robert carefully began to slice through one of the ropes around the bear's neck, Sheriff Cooper maintained his position, hand still near his weapon. "Everyone else stay back," he ordered. "If that animal makes any aggressive move, I'll have to act." The bear remained surprisingly still as Robert worked, her dark eyes watching the proceedings with what almost appeared to be understanding. Each cut rope brought visible relief. Her breathing became less labored, and the terrible wheezing sound gradually subsided. "She knows we're trying to help," Carol said quietly, watching the bear's reactions closely. "Animals have more awareness than we often give them credit for." Jamie had settled against Ryan's chest, but continued watching intently, his eyes never leaving the bear. "Bear better soon," he declared, with the absolute certainty that only children possess. "Then bear find baby." Despite the continued danger of the situation, Megan found herself believing her son's simple prediction. Something extraordinary had happened in this clearing. Something that had changed how everyone present viewed the relationship between humans and wildlife. The tensions that had divided the community just minutes earlier seemed to dissolve as they united in a common purpose. Walter Green had produced several bottles of water from his backpack, which Carol was using to rinse the bear's wounds where the ropes had cut into her flesh. Mayor Edwards stood with Robert, offering additional light as the evening shadows deepened across the clearing. Even Frank Dawson had joined the effort, helping to clear a path between the tree and the underbrush where the cub waited, ensuring that once the mother was sufficiently freed, she would have a clear route to her young. "The Wildlife Service team should be here in about 20 minutes, Sheriff Cooper announced, checking a text message on his phone. "They're bringing tranquilizer, equipment, and a transport cage." "Good," Carol replied without looking up from her work. "By then, we should have her stabilized and in less pain. They can make the final decision about relocation." As Robert carefully cut through another restraint, the bear's eyes moved once, more to Jamie, something like recognition in her gaze. The infant returned her look without fear, a small smile forming on his face. "Bear, go home," Jamie said confidently, patting Ryan's chest. "All better." His simple faith in a positive outcome seemed to infect everyone in the clearing, creating a sense of purpose and unity that transcended the earlier conflict. In this moment of crisis, the community had found a common humanity and discovered. It extended beyond their own species. The clearing had transformed into an impromptu rescue operation. Flashlight beams crisscrossed the growing darkness as Robert and Carol worked carefully to loosen the bear's restraints without giving her enough freedom to pose a danger. Sheriff Cooper had established a safety perimeter, keeping onlookers at a safer distance while allowing the work to continue. "Careful with that one," Robert murmured as he sliced through another rope, binding the bear's forelimb to the tree. "We want to give her some circulation back, but not enough mobility to lash out if she panics." The bear remained surprisingly still during their ministrations. Her dark eyes occasionally flicked toward the spot where her cub lay hidden, then back onto the humans working on her restraints. Intelligence shone in that gaze, a wary patience that seemed almost calculated. Megan, Ryan, and Jamie had retreated to the edge of the clearing as requested, but Jamie continued to watch the proceedings. With unusual intensity for an infant his age, his eyes never left the bear, and he occasionally pointed and repeated, "Bear better," as if offering encouragement from afar. "I still can't believe what just happened," Ryan whispered to Megan, his arm tight around her shoulders as they watched. "The rescue effort. Our 7-month-old just walked up to a wild bear. I think I aged 10 years in 30 seconds. Megan nodded, her heart still racing from the terror of those moments. "Did you see how the bear responded to him, though? It was like they understood each other somehow." Mayor Edwards approached them, his earlier political demeanor replaced by genuine concern. "Your son showed extraordinary courage," he said quietly. "Or perhaps it's not courage when you don't understand danger. Either way, he taught us all something important today." "Children often see things more clearly than we do," Megan replied, brushing her fingers through Jamie's soft. "No preconceptions, no past experiences clouding their judgment, just pure empathy." Carol Wilson had retrieved her medical bag from her truck and was now examining the bear's injuries, where the ropes had cut into her flesh. "The abrasions aren't as deep as I feared," she reported. "The bigger concern is dehydration and exhaustion." Walter Green approached with several more bottles of water he'd gathered from neighbors. "Will this help?" he asked, handing them to Carol. "Perfect timing," she replied, pouring water into a shallow depression she'd created in the earth near the bear's mouth. After a suspicious sniff, the animal began to lap at the water eagerly, confirming Carol's diagnosis of dehydration. "What about the cub?" Megan called out, voicing the question that had been nagging at her since they'd discovered the second bear. "Is it old enough to survive without its mother?" Robert glanced toward the hidden shape in the underbrush. "Hard to tell without seeing it properly, but given the mother's behavior, I'd guess it's still quite dependent. Bears typically stay with their cubs for about 2 years." "Bear baby hungry," Jamie declared with certainty, pointing toward the underbrush. Several heads turned toward the infant with newfound respect. Robert nodded solemnly. "You might be right, little one. If the mother hasn't been able to hunt properly, because of these confrontations with humans, the cub could be undernourished as well." As they spoke, a low rumble began to build in the bear's throat. Not quite a growl, but a sound of distress. Her gaze had fixed on something beyond the crowd, and her body tensed beneath the remaining restraints. Robert followed her line of sight and muttered under his breath. "The cub's moving," he said urgently. "It's trying to come to its mother." Sure, enough. The small, dark shape in the undergrowth had risen and was wobbling uncertainly toward the clearing. The sight sent a wave of emotion through the gathered villagers. The cub was tiny compared to its mother, with oversized paws and a hesitant gait that spoke of youth and inexperience. "We need to be very careful now," Robert warned, his voice low but carrying clearly in the tense silence that had fallen. "Mother bears are at their most dangerous when they perceive a threat to their cubs." The mother bear's eyes never left her, approaching young, and her muscles bunched beneath her fur, as though preparing to break free from any remaining restraints if necessary. The atmosphere in the clearing grew tense once more, as everyone realized the delicate balance could tip at any moment. "Bear baby, come to mama," Jamie said, struggling once more in Ryan's arms. "Let bear baby come." "It's too dangerous, Jamie," Megan insisted, placing a restraining hand on her son's back as Ryan tightened his grip. "The mother bear might hurt someone if she thinks we're threatening her baby." Carol paused in her work, assessing the situation with clinical precision. "We need to create a safe path for the cub to reach its mother," she suggested. "If they can be together, it might actually calm the mother down." Frank Dawson, who had been watching the proceedings with growing concern, stepped forward unexpectedly. "What if we all back away?" he suggested. "Give them space?" Robert nodded thoughtfully. "That could work. If we create a clear corridor and minimize our presence, the cub might approach naturally." He turned to Sheriff Cooper. "Can you move everyone back about 30 feet, form a wide semicircle, but leave a clear path from where the cub is to the tree?" The sheriff began directing people backward, creating the space Robert had requested. The townspeople moved willingly, many of them now invested in seeing this strange situation resolved peacefully. Even Frank, who had been so adamant about the bear's danger earlier, seemed genuinely concerned for the welfare of both animals. As the humans retreated, the little cub paused at the edge of the clearing, its small head swiveling as it assessed the strange scene before it. The mother bear made a soft, chuffing sound, a gentle call that seemed to reassure the youngster. "She's calling it," Robert explained in a hushed voice, telling it that it's safe to approach. Encouraged by its mother's call, the cub took a few more wobbling steps into the clearing. Its dark fur was dull rather than glossy, confirming Robert's suspicion that it was undernourished. Despite this, there was determination in its movements. As it headed directly for the tree where its mother was bound, Jamie watched the scene unfold with wide eyes. "Bear baby find mama," he whispered, his voice filled with such hope that Megan felt her own throat tighten with emotion. The clearing fell into a breathless silence as the cub made its way across the open space. No one dared move or speak for fear of frightening the young animal. Even the night creatures of the forest seemed to have paused their activities, as though aware of the drama unfolding in their midst. When the cub finally reached its mother, the scene that followed brought tears to even the most hardened eyes in the crowd. The little bear pressed itself against its mother's legs, whimpering softly. Despite her restraints, the mother bear managed to lower her head enough to nuzzle her cub, making gentle sounds of reassurance. "Oh my goodness," Carol whispered, her professional demeanor cracking slightly at the powerful display of animal affection before them. Frank Dawson cleared his throat roughly, looking away as though embarrassed by his own emotion. "Well," he muttered, "that changes things, doesn't it?" Megan held Jamie close, watching her son's reaction to the reunion. Jamie's face shone with joy so pure and perfect that it seemed to illuminate the darkening clearing. "Bear baby found mama," he said triumphantly, as though he had personally orchestrated the reunion. Robert carefully resumed his work on the bear's restraints, moving slowly to avoid frightening the cub. "We still need to be careful," he reminded everyone, "but I think our job just got a bit easier. She'll be more cooperative now that she has her cub back." As if to confirm his words, the mother bear had grown noticeably calmer since her cub's arrival. Though still watchful of the humans around her, the desperate tension in her body had eased somewhat. Her breathing had steadied, and she seemed content to let Robert and Carol continue their work as long as her cub remained safely beside her. Carol continued tending to the bear's wounds where the ropes had cut into her flesh. "I think she understands. We're trying to help," she said quietly. "Animals often have more awareness than we give them credit for." The cub, meanwhile, had settled against its mother's side, occasionally peering curiously at the humans who surrounded them. Its innocent trust provided a stark contrast to the wariness of its experienced parent. "What happens now?" Megan asked, voicing the question that hung in the air. "When the wildlife service arrives?" Robert exchanged glances with Sheriff Cooper before answering. "Normally problem bears are relocated to more remote areas, but with a cub this young..." He left the sentence unfinished, the implication clear. "Could they both be relocated together?" Walter suggested. "Somewhere they won't come into contact with farms or livestock." Before anyone could respond, the distant sound of an engine broke through the evening quiet. Headlights appeared through the trees, bouncing over the uneven forest road. "That'll be the wildlife service," Sheriff Cooper said, straightening his uniform. "I'll go brief them on the situation." As the sheriff moved toward the approaching vehicle, Megan felt a surge of anxiety. The next few minutes would determine the fate of these two bears, a mother and child who, despite being wild animals, had somehow touched the hearts of everyone present. Jamie seemed to sense the importance of the moment as well. "Bear mama and bear baby stay together," he declared firmly, as though his toddler's certainty could influence the decision of wildlife officials. The headlights drew closer, illuminating the extraordinary scene in the clearing. A community gathered around a bound bear and her cub, no longer in fear, but in concern, their perspective irrevocably changed by the innocent intervention of a child. The Wildlife Service truck came to a stop at the edge of the clearing, its headlights casting dust particles in the air and creating a surreal spotlight effect on the scene before it. When the door opened, a tall woman emerged carrying a tranquilizer rifle and wearing an expression of professional caution. "I'm Ranger Lisa Cortez," she announced, surveying the unusual gathering with a raised eyebrow. Sheriff Cooper filled. "Me in on the radio, but I'd like to see the situation for myself." Robert stepped forward to meet her, speaking in low, measured tones. "We've managed to loosen the restraints enough to prevent further injury, but the mother is still secured to the tree. Her cub rejoined her about 15 minutes ago." Ranger Cortez's gaze traveled from the bears to the assembled townspeople, her expression unreadable. "Unusual situation," she remarked. "Usually when I get called for a problem bear, I don't find half the town having a vigil for it." Carol approached, wiping her hands on a cloth. "The mother is dehydrated and has some lacerations from the ropes, but otherwise seems healthy. The cub appears undernourished but alert." The ranger nodded, her eyes still assessing the scene. "And you folks went from wanting this bear removed to trying to save it. What changed?" There was a moment of awkward silence before Frank Dawson surprisingly spoke up. "A baby," he said simply, nodding toward Jamie in Ryan's arms. "A little boy saw what we couldn't, or wouldn't." All eyes turned to Jamie, who remained in Ryan's arms, watching the proceedings with solemn attention. He met the ranger's gaze without fear, his innocent eyes reflecting the flashlights and the stars now appearing in the darkening sky above. "Bear. Mama and bear baby need help," he stated plainly, his voice carrying across the clearing with remarkable clarity for one so young. Ranger Cortez's stern expression softened almost imperceptibly. She approached Megan, Ryan, and Jamie, her movements deliberately slow and unthreatening. "And what's your name, young man?" she asked, her voice gentler than before. "Jamie," the child replied, studying her with frank curiosity. "You help bears?" "That's my job," the ranger confirmed with a slight smile. She turned to address the wider group. "I need to understand the situation better. Why was this bear considered a problem?" Frank stepped forward again, though his earlier anger had given way to a more reflective demeanor. "She's been taking chickens, damaged some property. My kids spotted her near our backyard last week, which scared us. But we didn't realize she had a cub depending on her, Several others added their experiences, complaints that now seemed less significant in light of what they'd learned about the bear's situation. Ranger Cortez approached the bears carefully, examining them with experienced eyes. The mother watched, warily but made no aggressive moves. The cub had fallen asleep against its mother's side, exhausted from its ordeal. "She's thin," the ranger observed, "not starving, but definitely undernourished. The cub should be fatter at this time of year, building reserves for winter." She turned back to face the townspeople, her decision visibly forming. "Here's what I can do. These bears need to be relocated. That's non-negotiable. They've learned that human settlements mean food, and that's a dangerous association." A murmur of concern rippled through the crowd. "But they'll stay together, right?" Megan asked, giving voice to Jamie's earlier demand. Ranger Cortez nodded. "Yes, we never separate mothers from cubs. There's a protected area about 70 miles. North of here, plenty of natural food sources and minimal human contact. I can transport them there tonight." Relief washed over the gathering at this news. Even Frank Dawson seemed satisfied with the solution, nodding his agreement. "What do you need from us?" Carol asked, ever practical. "I'll tranquilize them both for transport," the ranger explained. "I have equipment in my truck, but I could use some help loading them once they're sedated." Several men, including Robert and Sheriff Cooper, volunteered immediately. The clearing buzzed with a new sense of purpose as the ranger returned to her vehicle to prepare her equipment. Jamie, however, seemed troubled by this turn of events. "Bear Mama sleep?" he asked, his brow furrowed with concern. "Just for a little while, sweetheart," Megan explained gently. "The ranger is going to take her and her baby to a new home in the forest, far away from people. They'll be happier there." Jamie considered this explanation seriously. "Bear Mama wake up? Bear Baby too?" "Yes, they'll both wake up in their new home," Megan assured him, "and they'll have plenty of food and no more ropes." This seemed to satisfy Jamie, who nodded solemnly. "Good," he declared. "No more hurt." Ranger Cortez returned with her tranquilizer rifle and a case of equipment. "I'll need everyone to stay back," she instructed. "The mother might react defensively when she sees the rifle, even though it's just a dart gun." As the townspeople retreated to a safe distance, Megan carried Jamie toward the edge of the clearing. "We should go home now, sweetheart," she suggested softly. "It's getting late, and you've had quite an adventure." To her surprise, Jamie shook his head vigorously. "No!" "Mama, Jamie stay. Jamie watch Bear Mama and Bear Baby go new home." There was such determination in his small voice that Megan found herself unable to refuse. "All right," she conceded, "but we stay far back, okay? And when the ranger says it's time to leave, we listen." Jamie nodded his agreement, his eyes once more fixed on the bears by the tree. The mother bear was watching Ranger Cortez warily, her body tensed as though sensing that something significant was about to happen. The cub remained nestled against her side, occasionally blinking sleepily. At the strange proceedings, "Easy now," the ranger murmured, raising the rifle slowly. "This won't hurt more than a pinch." The clearing fell silent as she took aim. The mother bear shifted slightly, pulling her cub closer with one massive paw. There was such intelligence in her eyes, such awareness, that it almost seemed as though she understood what was happening. The rifle made a soft hissing sound as the ranger fired the tranquilizer dart. The mother bear flinched as it struck her shoulder, then growled softly, more in surprise than aggression. The cub, startled by the sound, pressed closer to its mother, whimpering in confusion. "It'll take a few minutes to take effect," Ranger Cortez explained, lowering her rifle. "The cub's dose is ready, but I'll wait until the mother is fully sedated before administering it." The townspeople watched in respectful silence as the tranquilizer began to work. The mother bear's movements grew increasingly sluggish, her massive head drooping as the sedative coursed through her system. The cub, sensing something was wrong, pawed at its mother anxiously, making small distressed sounds. "Bear Mama," Jamie whispered, tightening his grip on Megan's sweater. "Bear Mama sleeping now." "Yes, sweetheart," Megan answered softly. "The medicine is helping her sleep so they can take her and her baby to their new home." Jamie's eyes welled with tears as he watched the cub's increasing distress. The little bear was now circling its mother, nudging her with its snout, emitting pitiful cries that echoed across the clearing. Its confusion was palpable. A child unable to understand why its parent wouldn't respond. "The cub is frightened," Carol observed, her voice thick with emotion. "It doesn't understand what's happening." Ranger Cortez nodded grimly. "This is always the hardest part," she admitted, preparing the smaller tranquilizer dart for the cub. "But it's necessary. The cub will wake up beside its mother in a better place." As she raised the rifle again, Jamie suddenly called out, his voice surprisingly strong for such a small child. "Bear baby, bear mama sleep now. Bear baby sleep too. Then wake up happy." The unexpected sound caused the cub to pause in its frantic movements, its small head swiveling toward Jamie. For a moment, child and cub locked eyes across the clearing, two young beings somehow communicating beyond words or species. Ranger Cortez took advantage of the cub's momentary stillness to fire the tranquilizer dart. It struck with precision, causing the small bear to flinch and then shake its head in confusion. Unlike its mother, the cub's reaction to the sedative was faster, its smaller body absorbing the drug more quickly. Within a minute, its movements became uncoordinated and wobbly. "Bear baby sleep too," Jamie whispered, watching as the cub slumped against its mother's now unconscious form. "Bear baby dream nice dreams." Once both bears were fully sedated, Ranger Cortez directed the volunteers to help her carefully cut away the remaining ropes that bound the mother bear to the tree. "Easy does it," she instructed, as Robert and Sheriff Cooper worked with knives to free the animal. "Support her weight so she doesn't injure herself when the ropes give way." The atmosphere in the clearing had transformed completely from the tense, angry scene of 2 hours earlier. Now there was a reverent quality to the silence as the townspeople watched the rescue operation unfold. Even Frank Dawson lent his strength to help lower the massive bear gently to the ground once she was freed from the tree. Carol immediately began treating the wounds where the ropes had cut into the bear's flesh, applying antiseptic and antibiotics from her veterinary supplies. "These should heal cleanly," she reported. "No signs of infection yet, thankfully." Ranger Cortez had returned to her truck and was now backing it up to the edge of the clearing. The rear contained a large steel transport cage, spacious enough for both bears. "We'll need to move quickly," she instructed. "I want to get them to the release site before the mother starts to wake up." 6 men, including Robert, Frank, and Sheriff Cooper, positioned themselves around the mother bear, following the Rangers' instructions. They rolled her onto a heavy tarp that would serve as a makeshift stretcher. The cub, small enough to be carried, was gently lifted by Carol, who cradled it with the same tender care she might show a human child. "Bear mama heavy," Jamie observed solemnly as the men strained to lift the tarp with its massive burden. "Yes, she is," Ryan agreed, watching the careful procession. "But all these people are helping her, just like you wanted." The weight of the mother bear made the short journey to the truck challenging. The men's faces reddened with effort, their breath coming in short gasps as they navigated carefully across the uneven ground. Despite the difficulty, no one complained or suggested abandoning the task. Something fundamental had shifted in the community's collective mindset, a change initiated by a child's simple act of compassion. "Almost there," Ranger Cortez encouraged as they reached the back of the truck. "On 3, we lift her into the cage. 1, 2, 3. With a final coordinated heave, the men managed to slide the unconscious bear into the transport cage. Carol followed, placing the cub close to its mother's side where it would feel secure upon waking. She took a moment to check both animals' vital signs before stepping back. "They're both stable," she confirmed. "Their pulses are strong." Ranger Cortez nodded her satisfaction. "Good work, everyone. I'll radio ahead to the release site team. They'll be expecting us in about 90 minutes. As she secured the cage door, something unexpected happened. Jamie wriggled free from Megan's arms once more, darting forward before his mother could stop him. This time, however, he didn't approach the bears but stopped before the ranger, his small face serious. "Jamie, say goodbye to Bear Mama and Bear Baby," he insisted, looking up at the tall woman with unwavering determination. The ranger glanced at Megan, who had rushed forward to retrieve her son. Seeing the emotion in both their faces, she nodded. "Quickly." "Okay," she agreed, kneeling down to Jamie's level, "but you have to stay outside the cage." "Understood?" Jamie nodded solemnly. With the ranger's hand resting protectively on his shoulder, he approached the cage. The bears lay peacefully inside, their breathing deep and regular in sedated sleep. "Goodbye, Bear Mama," Jamie said softly, placing his tiny hand against the cage bars. "Goodbye, Bear Baby. Be happy in new home. No more ropes, no more hurt." Several of the watching townspeople openly wiped tears from their eyes at the simple farewell. Even Frank Dawson, who had been so adamant about the bear's danger earlier, looked away, his weathered face working with emotion. "Thank you, Jamie," Ranger Cortez said quietly as she guided him back to Megan. "You reminded all of us of something important today." Megan lifted her son into her arms, holding him close. "What did we learn today, sweetheart?" she asked, though she thought she already knew the answer. Jamie considered the question with the serious contemplation only a child can give to such matters. "Be kind," he said finally, "even when scared." A murmur of agreement rippled through the gathered townspeople. The simplicity of the lesson, delivered by a child not yet 1 year old, resonated deeply with everyone present. Ranger Cortez closed and secured the back of her truck, then turned to address the community one last time. "I'll be back tomorrow to check the area for any other bears, but I don't think you'll have further problems. This mother was likely responsible for all the recent incidents." "What can we do to prevent this from happening again?" Robert asked, voicing the question that many were now considering. "We don't want another bear to suffer like this one did." The ranger nodded, appreciating the shift in attitude. "Secure your garbage and livestock better. Consider electric fencing for your animals. And if you see a bear, call my office immediately. Don't try to handle it yourselves." She glanced at the cage, holding the sleeping bears. "These animals aren't our enemies. They're just trying to survive, same as us." With final goodbyes and promises to inform the community of the bear's successful relocation, Ranger Cortez climbed into her truck. The headlights swept across the clearing as the vehicle turned around, illuminating the faces of the gathered townspeople one last time before heading down the forest road. As the sound of the engine faded into the distance, the community began to disperse, heading back toward Pine Valley in small groups. The conversation was subdued but thoughtful, many reflecting on the extraordinary events they had witnessed. Megan held Jamie close as they walked back along the forest path, following the bobbing flashlight beams of neighbors ahead. The child was growing heavy in her arms, fatigue finally catching up with him after the intense emotions of the evening. "Mama," Jamie murmured sleepily against Megan's shoulder. "Bears dream happy now." Megan kissed her son's forehead, marveling at the pure heart that beat within this small body. "Yes, my brave boy. I think they're dreaming very happy dreams of their new forest home." "Good," Jamie sighed, his eyelids drooping. Jamie dreamed too. The following morning dawned clear and bright, sunlight filtering through the curtains of Jamie's nursery where he still slept soundly, exhausted from the previous day's adventure. Megan stood in the doorway, watching her son's peaceful slumber while Ryan prepared breakfast in the kitchen. I called the Wildlife Service office, Ryan said, quietly when she joined him. Ranger Cortez reports both bears are doing well. They released them at first light in the Black Ridge Wilderness area. The mother woke up shortly after release and immediately checked on her cub. Megan felt a profound sense of relief wash over her. "I'm so glad," she whispered. "Jamie will want to know they're okay." "I still can't believe what happened yesterday," Ryan said, shaking his head in wonder as he poured coffee. "Our son walked up to a wild bear, Megan, and somehow he knew exactly what to do." "Children see with their hearts," Megan replied, accepting the steaming mug gratefully. "No prejudice, no fear, just pure empathy. Something we adults often forget." A knock at the front door interrupted their conversation. Opening it, Megan was surprised to find Mayor Edwards standing on their porch, accompanied by Frank Dawson and several other townspeople. "I hope we're not disturbing you too early," the mayor said, his usual formal demeanor softened by a genuine smile. "We wanted to share some news with you and your family." Inviting them in, Megan called Ryan from the kitchen. Jamie was still sleeping soundly, unaware of the gathering in their living room. The town council held an emergency meeting this morning. Mayor Edwards explained once everyone was settled. "In light of yesterday's events, we've unanimously approved a new wildlife management protocol for Pine Valley." Frank Dawson, who had been so angry about the bear just the day before, stepped forward. "We're implementing better garbage containment systems throughout town," he announced, "and I've offered to help coordinate with local farmers and homeowners to install proper fencing. Robert Mason has agreed to conduct educational workshops about coexisting with wildlife," the mayor continued. "And Dr. Wilson will be offering free first aid training for handling injured animals safely." Megan and Ryan exchanged surprised glances. "That's wonderful," Megan said, deeply moved by the community's rapid response. "But why tell us first?" Mayor Edwards smiled. "Because your son was the catalyst for all of this. His simple act of compassion made us all see what we'd been missing. Sometimes it takes a child to remind adults of basic truths we've forgotten." Frank cleared his throat, clearly emotional, though trying to hide it. "My kids were asking me this morning why we tied up the bear instead of helping it," he admitted. "They heard about what happened. News travels fast in Pine Valley. I didn't have a good answer for them." "We'd like to establish an annual Wildlife Awareness Day in Pine Valley," the mayor added. "With your permission, we'd like to name it after Jamie, not to put him in the spotlight, but to remember the lesson he taught us all." Before Megan or Ryan could respond, the sound of tiny footsteps came from the hallway. Jamie appeared in the doorway, hair tousled from sleep, clutching his favorite stuffed animal, a teddy bear that now seemed to hold new significance. "Bear, Mama, okay?" were his first words, looking around at the gathered adults with solemn inquiry. Ryan lifted his son into his arms. "Yes, buddy. Bear Mama and Bear Baby are at their new home in the forest. They're both safe and happy." Jamie's face lit up with a smile that seemed to brighten the entire room. "No more ropes?" "No more ropes," Frank confirmed, approaching the child with unexpected gentleness. "And we're going to make sure all the animals around Pine Valley stay safe from now on. You taught us how important that is, Jamie." The little boy considered this with characteristic seriousness before nodding his approval. Then, with the quick changing focus of the very young, he pointed to the kitchen. "Breakfast now?" The adults laughed, tension dissolving in the face of such ordinary concerns. As the townspeople said their goodbyes, promising to share more details of their wildlife initiative later, Megan felt a profound sense of gratitude. What could have been a tragedy had instead become a moment of transformation, not just for two bears, but for an entire community. Later that afternoon, as Jamie played contentedly in the backyard under Ryan's watchful eye, Megan received a in-text message from Ranger Cortez. Attached was a photo taken by a remote camera in the Black Ridge Wilderness area. The mother bear and her cub, now fully awake, exploring their new territory together. The ranger had added a simple caption. "Your son was right. They look happy." Megan showed the photo to Jamie, who touched the screen with gentle fingers. "Bear mama smile," he declared with absolute certainty. Though Megan couldn't detect anything resembling a smile on the bear's ursine features, yet somehow she thought perhaps Jamie could see something the rest of them couldn't. "Yes, sweetheart," she agreed, hugging him close. "I think she is smiling." 1 week later, the incident in the clearing had transformed from a crisis into a story that spread throughout Pine Valley and beyond. Local newspapers had picked up the tale of the infant who had changed hearts and saved a mother bear and her cub. Jamie's simple act of compassion had resonated far beyond their small community, touching something universal in all who heard it. Megan found herself navigating this unexpected attention with protective caution. While proud of her son's instinctive kindness, she was wary of too much focus on Jamie. Children, she believed, should be allowed to be children, not symbols or celebrities. On this particular morning, Megan sat at her kitchen table sipping coffee and watching Jamie in the backyard. The child was engaged in an elaborate game with his stuffed animals, arranging them carefully beneath the sprawling maple tree. From what Megan could gather, Jamie was creating a new forest home for his toys, a theme that had dominated his play since the bear incident. A knock at the front door interrupted her thoughts. Setting down her coffee, Megan went to answer it, surprised to find Carol Wilson on her doorstep. "Good morning," the veterinarian greeted her with a warm smile. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all," Megan assured her, stepping back to invite her in. "Jamie and I were just having a quiet morning. Would you like some coffee?" Carol accepted the offer, and soon they were both seated at the kitchen table watching Jamie through the window as he continued his imaginative play. "I received some news I thought you and Jamie might want to hear," Carol said, cradling her mug between her hands. "I spoke with Ranger Cortez yesterday. The bears are doing exceptionally well in their new location." Megan felt a wave of relief wash over her. "That's wonderful news. Jamie asks about them every day." Carol nodded, her expression thoughtful. "The ranger set up some trail cameras in the area. She shared a few images with me." She reached into her bag and pulled out several printouts, sliding them across the table. Megan examined the grainy night vision photos with growing emotion. There, clearly captured in the camera's infrared lens, were the mother bear and her cub. They appeared to be foraging near a stream, their bodies moving with purpose. The wounds on the mother's neck where the ropes had cut in were barely visible now, healing well, just as Carol had predicted. "They look so free," Megan whispered, running her finger over the image. "So different than that night." The ranger says, "They're adapting well to their new territory," Carol explained. "Plenty of natural food sources, no human settlements nearby. The cub has already gained weight." Megan glanced out at Jamie again, wondering whether to call him in to see the photos. The child had been having occasional nightmares about the bear mama with ropes, waking tearful and concerned. Perhaps seeing the bears looking healthy would help ease those fears. "Jamie," she called through the open window, "could you come inside for a minute? There's something special to see." The little boy looked up from his play, his face brightening at the prospect of a surprise. He gathered his favorite stuffed bear, a new addition to his collection since the incident, and hurried inside. "Dr. Carroll!" he exclaimed upon seeing their visitor. Jamie had formed a special bond with the veterinarian in the days following the bear rescue. Carol had visited several times, patiently answering Jamie's endless questions about animals and their care. "Hello, little one," Carol greeted him warmly. "I brought some pictures I thought you might like to see." Jamie climbed onto a chair, his eyes widening as he saw the photos spread on the table. "Bear Mama," he gasped. immediately recognizing the animals despite the green tint of the night vision images. "Bear baby too!" "That's right," Carol confirmed, smiling at the child's excitement. "This is their new home in the forest, far away from people. See how the baby is getting bigger, and look, no more ropes on Bear Mama." Jamie studied the images with intense concentration, his small finger tracing the outlines of the bears just as his mother had done. "Bear Mama happy now," he declared with satisfaction. "Bear baby too." "Yes, they are," Carol agreed. "And do you know who helped make that happen?" "You did, Jamie. When you showed kindness to the Bear Mama, you taught everyone an important lesson." Jamie absorbed this praise with the solemn dignity that children sometimes possess in moments of genuine significance. "Bear Mama needed help," he said simply, as though his actions had been the most natural thing in the world, which perhaps they had been. After Jamie had examined the photos to his satisfaction, Megan suggested he could color a picture of the bears in their new home. Eagerly, the child settled at his small desk in the corner with paper and crayons, humming softly to himself as he worked. With Jamie occupied, Carol leaned closer to Megan, her voice lowered. "There's something else I wanted to discuss with you. The town council met yesterday to talk about establishing better protocols for wildlife encounters." Megan raised her eyebrows in surprise. Pine Valley had always had a somewhat adversarial relationship with the wild creatures that surrounded them, seeing them as threats rather than neighbors sharing the same environment. "That's quite a change in attitude," she remarked. Carol nodded, her eyes crinkling with a smile. "Frank Dawson proposed it, if you can believe that. He said, and I quote, 'If a baby can show more sense and compassion than the rest of us, combined, maybe we need to rethink our approach.'" Megan glanced at Jamie, marveling at the ripple effect her son's simple act had created. "What does the council have in mind?" "Educational programs for starters," Carol replied. "Robert is working with the elementary school to develop lessons about local wildlife. The council is also considering subsidizing electric fencing for farms with livestock and creating better systems for securing garbage to reduce bear attractants. These were sensible, practical solutions that acknowledged both human needs and animal welfare, a balanced approach that had been missing before. Megan felt a surge of pride, not just in Jamie, but in their community's capacity for growth and change. "There's one more thing," Carol continued, reaching into her bag again. She withdrew a children's book with a colorful cover featuring a bear cub. "The regional library has started a new program about wildlife awareness. They asked if Jamie might help launch it. Nothing big, just a story hour where this book would be read. It's about understanding bear behavior and respecting wildlife." Megan hesitated, protective instincts flaring. "I don't want Jamie to become some kind of mascot or spectacle." Carol nodded understanding. "Of course not. It would be very low-key and entirely your choice. I just thought you should know that Jamie's story is having positive effects beyond just our little town." From his desk, Jamie held up his drawing, proudly. "Look, Mama, Bear Mama and Bear Baby in new home." The artwork was typical of a child his age. Simple shapes and bold colors, the bears represented by brown ovals with smaller circles for heads. But Jamie had added something special, a bright yellow sun shining down on the bears and what appeared to be a small human figure, himself, waving goodbye from the edge of the page. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Megan praised, feeling a lump form in her throat. Carol studied the drawing with genuine interest. "You know, Jamie, I think the library would love to display your artwork at their wildlife awareness event. Would that be okay with you?" Jamie nodded enthusiastically, pleased by the idea of sharing his creation. He returned to his desk and began a new drawing, this one featuring more animals joining the bears in their forest home. As Carol prepared to leave, she paused at the door. "Something special happened that night in the clearing," she said quietly. Not just for the bears, but for all of us. Sometimes it takes a child to remind adults of the simple truths we've forgotten. After Carol had gone, Megan sat beside Jamie at his small desk, watching as her son filled page after page with colorful drawings of animals in harmony. Bears and deer and rabbits and birds, all sharing the same forest world. "Mama," Jamie asked suddenly, looking up from his artwork, "can we see real bear mama and bear baby again?" Megan smoothed his curls gently. "No, sweetheart. They need to stay in their new forest home, far away from people. That's what makes them happy and safe." Jamie considered this answer thoughtfully. "But we can see pictures." "Yes," Megan agreed. "We can see pictures, and we can remember them in our hearts." This answer seemed to satisfy Jamie, who returned to his drawing with renewed focus. Megan watched his small hands move across the paper, creating a world where humans and animals existed in peaceful understanding, and marveled at the wisdom that sometimes came from the youngest hearts. As autumn deepened around Pine Valley, the forest blazed with color: crimson maples, golden oaks, and the russet hues of dying ferns. 2 months had passed since the night in the clearing, but the effects of that evening continued to ripple through the community in unexpected ways. On this brisk Saturday morning, Megan bundled Jamie in a warm jacket and led him toward the town square. The entire community had gathered for the unveiling of a new educational display outside the library, a project that had grown from the seeds planted that night with the bears. "Will there be bears, Mama?" Jamie asked, skipping alongside Megan with boundless energy. "No real bears," Megan explained for what felt like the 100th time. "But there will be pictures and information about bears and other forest animals." The town square looked festive, decorated with autumn garlands and educational posters. Tables had been set up with information about local wildlife, and representatives from the state's conservation department were on hand to answer questions. Children from the elementary school had created artwork featuring the animals that shared their forest home: foxes, deer, raccoons, and of course bears. Mayor Edwards stood on the library steps, waiting for everyone to gather. At 65, he had served as Pine Valley's mayor for over a decade, known for his practical approach to governance and his deep love for the town. Today, he seemed particularly pleased as he observed the community coming together. "Look, there's Mr. Frank!" Jamie exclaimed, pointing to where Frank Dawson was helping set up a display about proper livestock fencing. The farmer had undergone perhaps the most dramatic transformation since the bear incident, becoming an unlikely advocate for wildlife conservation. Frank spotted them and waved, his weathered face breaking into a smile. "Good morning, Mr. Jamie," he called. "Come see what we've put together." Megan followed as Jamie darted over to Frank's display. The farmer knelt to Jamie's level, explaining the simple models he had created, showing traditional fencing versus wildlife deterrent fencing. "See here," he said, pointing to the electric fence model. "This keeps my chickens safe without hurting the bears or foxes who might be curious. And these special garbage containers," he indicated another model, "have locks that keep animals from getting in and finding food." Jamie nodded seriously, absorbing the information. "So bear mamas don't have to go near people houses for food." "Exactly right," Frank confirmed, his expression softening as it always did around Jamie these days. "We're learning to be better neighbors to the animals." The change in Frank had been remarkable. After the night in the clearing, he had reached out to wildlife experts for advice on protecting his livestock without harming predators. Now his farm served as a model for others in the region, proving that coexistence was possible with the right approach. Mayor Edwards called for attention, and the crowd gathered around the library steps. Megan lifted Jamie into her arms so he could see better, settling the child on her hip as the mayor began to speak. 2 months ago, something extraordinary happened in our community, Mayor Edwards began, his voice carrying across the square. A confrontation that could have ended tragically became instead a moment of transformation, a lesson in compassion taught to us by the youngest member of our community. Many eyes turned toward Jamie, who buried his face shyly against Megan's shoulder, suddenly aware of the attention. Since that night, the mayor continued, Pine Valley has embraced a new approach to living alongside our wild neighbors. We've implemented better waste management protocols, educated ourselves about wildlife behavior, and found ways to protect our livestock and property without resorting to cruel methods. He gestured to the various displays around the square. Today, we're unveiling our permanent educational center at the library, where residents and visitors alike can learn about the magnificent creatures that share our forest home. We're proud to announce that reported conflicts with wildlife have decreased by 70% in just 2 months. Applause rippled through the crowd. Megan felt a surge of pride, not just in Jamie, but in their entire community's willingness to learn and grow. And now, Mayor Edwards announced, I'd like to invite Ranger Lisa Cortez to share some special news. The wildlife ranger stepped forward, looking much more relaxed than she had on the night they first met. She nodded toward Megan and Jamie before addressing the crowd. As many of you know, we relocated a mother bear and her cub from this area 2 months ago, she began. I'm pleased to report that they are thriving in their new territory. The cub has nearly doubled in size, and recent trail camera footage shows them preparing well for the coming winter. She signaled to an assistant who unveiled a large mounted photograph showing the mother bear and her cub wading in a mountain stream, both looking healthy and strong. The image brought murmurs of appreciation from the gathered residents. Beyond this success story, Ranger Cortez continued, the changes implemented by Pine Valley have become a model for other communities facing similar wildlife challenges. Your town is being featured in our department's educational materials as an example of how humans and wildlife can coexist successfully. More applause followed this announcement. Megan could see genuine pride on the faces around her. What had begun as one small moment of compassion had grown into something that was changing lives, both human and animal, across the region. After the speeches concluded, the crowd dispersed to explore the various displays and activities. Carol Wilson had set up a veterinary station where she was explaining animal first aid to interested residents. Robert Mason was leading a nature walk at the forest's edge, teaching people to identify animal tracks and signs. Jamie tugged at Megan's hand, pointing toward the library entrance where a storytelling session was about to begin. Inside, children were gathering on colorful cushions as a librarian prepared to read from a new book titled The Bear and the Child. Megan recognized the book immediately. It had been created based on Jamie's experience, though the names and specific details had been changed. The illustrations were beautiful, depicting a small child teaching adults to see a wild creature with compassion rather than fear. They found seats at the back of the group just as the librarian began reading. Jamie listened with rapt attention to the story he had helped inspire, his eyes wide and serious. When the tale concluded with the bears finding a safe new home, several children asked questions about real bears and their habits. Why do bears come near people? One boy asked. The librarian smiled, prepared for such questions, usually because they're hungry and can smell food that humans have left out. Bears have excellent noses, much better than ours. Are bears mean? A small girl inquired, her voice trembling slightly. Bears aren't mean, the librarian explained gently. They're wild animals who are usually afraid of humans and try to avoid us. They don't understand our rules or our world. That's why we need to be responsible and give them the space they need. Jamie raised his hand. When called upon, he said simply, "Bears are mamas too." The librarian's expression softened. That's exactly right. Many bears are mothers looking after their cubs, just like human mothers care for their children. As they left the library, Jamie proudly carrying a certificate for participating in the Wildlife Awareness Program, they encountered Frank Dawson again. He was deep in conversation with several farmers from neighboring communities, explaining the new fencing system he had implemented. The initial cost is higher, he was saying, but the long-term savings are substantial. I haven't lost a single chicken since installing it, and I sleep better, knowing I'm not causing harm to the wildlife. Noticing Megan and Jamie, he, Winter, descended upon Pine Valley with gentle persistence, transforming the forest into a crystalline wonderland of snow-laden branches and ice-trimmed streams. 3 months had passed since the bear incident, and the Wildlife Education Center at the library had become a valued community resource, regularly hosting school groups and visitors from neighboring towns. On this particular December morning, Megan found herself once again explaining hibernation to Jamie as they built a snowman in their backyard. "So Bear Mama and Bear Baby are sleeping?" Jamie asked, his breath forming small clouds in the crisp air as he patted snow onto their creation. "That's right," Megan confirmed, helping Jamie position a carrot nose. They found a den, like a small cave, where they'll sleep until spring comes. The mama bear's body will keep them both warm, and they won't need to eat because their bodies saved extra fat during the autumn. Jamie considered this information with his characteristic seriousness. "They dream happy dreams all winter." "I think they probably do," Megan smiled, adjusting Jamie's woolen hat, which had slipped over his eyes. Dreams of spring and sunshine, and plenty of berries to eat. Their peaceful morning was interrupted by the sound of a vehicle approaching. Megan looked up to see Ranger Cortez's truck pulling into their driveway, an unexpected sight that immediately piqued her curiosity. "Jamie, look who's come to visit," she said, lifting her son into her arms and walking toward the front of the house. The ranger stepped out of her truck, looking somewhat more formal than usual in a pressed uniform rather than her typical field gear. She carried a small package wrapped in simple brown paper. "Good morning," she called, approaching with a warm smile. "Sorry to drop by unannounced. I was passing through on official business and wanted to deliver something personally." "We're happy for the visit," Megan assured her, gesturing toward the house. "Would you like to come in for some hot chocolate? Jamie and I were just about to take a break from our snowman construction." Inside, with steaming mugs before them at the kitchen table, the ranger explained the purpose of her visit. "Our department has been documenting the success of the Pine Valley Wildlife Management Program," she began. "The changes your community has implemented are quite remarkable. We've seen nothing like it elsewhere in the state." Jamie, warming his hands on his mug of hot chocolate topped with miniature marshmallows, looked up at the mention of wildlife. "Bear Mama sleeping now," he informed the ranger solemnly. She smiled, nodding at him. "That's exactly right, Jamie. The mother bear and her cub found a perfect den for the winter. Our trail cameras caught them just before they settled in." She slid the package across the table. "That's actually why I'm here. I thought you might like to have these." Megan helped Jamie unwrap the package, revealing a small photo album bound in forest green leather. Inside were a dozen high-quality prints from trail cameras, each labeled with dates and locations. The photographs chronicled the journey of the mother bear and her cub through the months since their relocation, foraging in berry patches, fishing in streams, and finally preparing their winter den. "These are wonderful," Megan breathed, genuinely touched by the thoughtful gift. Jamie leaned in close, his finger tracing the images with reverent care. "The last one was taken just 2 weeks ago," the ranger explained, turning to the final photograph. It showed the mother bear guiding her cub into a natural den formed by the upturned roots of a massive fallen pine. They chose an excellent spot, well protected from the elements and predators. "Bear Mama, take good care of Bear Baby," Jamie observed, his voice carrying absolute certainty. "She certainly does," the ranger agreed. She hesitated, then continued more seriously, addressing Megan. "There's something else I wanted to discuss. The State Wildlife Department is expanding its educational outreach program, and they're interested in featuring Pine Valley's story, particularly what happened that night in the clearing." Megan felt a familiar protective instinct rise within her. What exactly would that involve? The ranger must have sensed her concern. "Nothing intrusive," she assured her. "They'd like to document the community's transformation, the new policies, the educational center, the changed attitudes." Jamie's role would be acknowledged, but not sensationalized. She reached into her pocket and withdrew a business card. "This is the contact information for Mark Daniels, our education coordinator. He's excellent with children and very respectful of privacy concerns. He'd like to speak with you, but there's absolutely no pressure." Megan accepted the card, appreciating her sensitivity. "I'll think about it. My main concern has always been ensuring that Jamie isn't turned into some kind of spectacle." "I understand completely," the ranger nodded. "Mark feels the same way. The focus would be on the community's journey, not on putting Jamie in the spotlight." Their conversation was interrupted by Jamie, who had been flipping through the photo album repeatedly. "Ranger Lisa," he said, using the name he had created for her. "Bear Mama has friends now." He was pointing to one of the pictures where, in the far background, other wildlife could be seen. A deer and what appeared to be a fox passing through the same meadow where the mother bear was foraging. The ranger smiled. "Yes, she does. The place where we relocated her is a protected wildlife corridor, a special path that many different animals use to travel safely. She has plenty of animal neighbors there." This answer clearly pleased Jamie, who nodded as though confirming something he had already suspected. "Good. Everyone needs friends." After the ranger had departed, promising to keep them updated on the bear's progress when spring arrived, Megan and Jamie returned to their snowman. As they worked, Megan found herself reflecting on the ranger's invitation. Part of her wanted to keep Jamie's involvement private, a precious memory between them and their immediate community. Another part recognized that their story might help other towns find better ways to coexist with wildlife. "Jamie," she asked carefully, "how would you feel about telling other people about the night we helped the Bear Mama and her baby?" Jamie paused in his snow patting, his expression thoughtful. "Tell other people to help animals?" "Yes," Megan confirmed, "to teach them to be kind to animals, even when they're scared." Jamie nodded, his decision immediate and certain. "Yes, tell everyone. No more ropes for animals." The simplicity and clarity of her son's response touched something deep within Megan. Perhaps there was wisdom in sharing their experience if it meant preventing other animals from suffering as that mother. Bear had suffered. She made a mental note to contact Mark Daniels after the holidays. As December progressed, Pine Valley embraced the festive season with renewed community spirit. The town square sparkled with lights, and the Wildlife Education Center featured a special exhibit on how forest animals survived the winter months. Children had created artwork depicting deer, rabbits, foxes, and bears in their winter habitats, and these colorful interpretations lined the library walls. Frank Dawson, continuing his remarkable transformation, had organized a special fundraiser among the local farmers. They had collected enough money to purchase additional wildlife corridor land adjacent to the national forest, expanding the protected area where animals could travel safely between habitats. The deed to this land had been presented to the Wildlife Department at a special ceremony, with Frank insisting that Jamie be allowed to place the symbolic ribbon on the framed document. This land will help all forest animals have safe places to live and travel. Frank had explained to Jamie at the ceremony, kneeling to his level as he often did now when speaking with him. No fences, no traps, just trees and streams and all the things wild creatures need. Jamie had nodded with complete understanding. For bear mamas and bear babies and deer and foxes, he had recited, naming the animals he had come to know, through books and the educational center. Now, as Christmas approached, Pine Valley prepared for its annual holiday festival, but this year with a new theme. Harmony with nature had been chosen as the celebration's focus, with decorations featuring local wildlife created by school children and community members. Megan had volunteered to help coordinate the children's activities at the festival, which would include wildlife-themed crafts and storytelling sessions. She found herself surprisingly comfortable in this more public role, gradually overcoming her initial reluctance to be associated with the bear incident. On the evening before the festival, Megan sat with Jamie in their living room, stringing popcorn and cranberries for garlands that would decorate the trees in the town square. These biodegradable decorations would later be moved to the forest edge as winter treats for birds and small animals. Another new tradition born from the community's changed perspective. "Mama," Jamie said suddenly, his small fingers pausing. "In their work, I had a dream about Bear Mama." Megan set down her needle. "Did you? What happened in your dream?" Jamie's face grew serious with concentration as he tried to capture the ephemeral images from his sleeping mind. Bear Mama and Bear Baby were sleeping in their cave, but they were dreaming too. They dreamed about the night with the ropes. Megan felt a small chill at her son's words. Jamie occasionally displayed an intuitive understanding that seemed beyond his years. Moments that reminded Megan of that night in the clearing when the toddler had somehow connected with a wild creature on a level the adults could not fathom. In the dream, Jamie continued, his voice growing softer, Bear Mama wasn't scared anymore. She remembered the little boy who helped her. He looked up at his mother with wide, earnest eyes. "That was me, Mama." "Yes, sweetheart," Megan confirmed gently. "You helped the Bear Mama when she was scared and hurt." Jamie nodded, satisfied with this confirmation. "Bear Mama will remember me forever," he stated with absolute certainty. "And I will remember Bear Mama forever." The simple declaration held a weight and significance that made Megan's throat tighten with emotion. "I think you're right," she managed to say. "Some connections are never forgotten." Jamie returned to his stringing, humming softly as he worked. But Megan continued to reflect on her son's dream and the strange, powerful bond that had formed between a human child and a wild creature in a moment of crisis. There was something profound in that connection, something that transcended the usual boundaries between humanity and wilderness. The Christmas festival the next day brought the entire community together in the town square. Snow fell in gentle, fat flakes, adding a perfect seasonal touch to the celebrations. The newly decorated trees sparkled with lights, and the wildlife-themed ornaments created by the school children added splashes of color against the evergreen branches. Mayor Edwards had arranged for local musicians to perform their melodies, filling the square as residents mingled, sipping hot cider and admiring the decorations. The Wildlife Education Center had been transformed into a winter wonderland, featuring informative displays about how various forest creatures adapted to the cold season. "Megan! Jamie!" Carol Wilson called, waving to them from near the refreshment table. The veterinarian was serving hot chocolate alongside Robert Mason, both wearing festive sweaters adorned with woodland animals. As they approached, Megan noticed the unusual pendant hanging around Carol's neck, what appeared to be a small, silvery paw print on a simple chain. Carol noticed her gaze and touched the pendant with a smile. Regional Wildlife Service issued these to everyone who participated in successful animal rescues this year. Robert has one too. Robert nodded, pulling a similar pendant from beneath his sweater. They call it the Wildlife Guardian recognition. The paw print is cast from an actual bear track. Not our particular mother bear, but a similar size. We thought you should have one as well, Carol continued, pulling a small box from her pocket and offering it to Megan. Or rather, Jamie should. Inside the box lay a smaller version of the pendant, perfectly sized for a child. Jamie's eyes widened as Megan lifted it for him to see. "Bear mama footprint," he whispered, reaching out to touch it with reverent fingers. "It's to remember that you're a wildlife guardian too," Robert explained seriously. "Maybe the most important one of all, because you taught the grown-ups what to do." Jamie allowed Carol to fasten the pendant around his neck, his small chest puffing with pride as he displayed it over his winter coat. "I will wear it always," he declared, "to remember Bear Mama and Bear Baby." As they continued through the festival, Megan was struck by how many people greeted Jamie by name, often kneeling to his level to admire his new pendant and exchange a few words. Her son had become something of a beloved figure in Pine Valley. Not a celebrity exactly, but a symbol of the community's transformation. "Mrs. Foster," called a voice, and Megan turned to see Mark Daniels, the wildlife education coordinator Ranger Cortez had mentioned. He was a youthful man, with a bright, intelligent face, bundled against the cold in a practical parka emblazoned with the state wildlife department's logo. "I hope you don't mind my attending the festival," he said, extending his hand. "Ranger, Cortez mentioned she'd spoken to you about our educational program. I thought it might be helpful to see firsthand how Pine Valley has implemented its wildlife awareness initiatives." "Not at all," Megan assured him, shaking hands. "The festival is open to everyone. This is my son, Jamie." Mark knelt to greet Jamie with a warm smile. "Hello, Jamie. I've heard you're very good at helping animals." Jamie studied the man carefully before responding. "Are you a friend of the animals?" he asked, his standard question for new adults these days. "I certainly try to be," Mark answered. "Seriously, my job is to help people learn how to be good neighbors to wild animals like bears and deer and foxes." This answer clearly satisfied Jamie, who nodded approval. "Bears need good neighbors," Mark's expression softened further. "Yes, they do. And thanks to people like you, they're finding more of them." He straightened and turned back to Megan. "Your community has accomplished something remarkable here. The integration of wildlife education into everyday life, the practical measures to reduce human-wildlife conflict. It's exactly the model we've been trying to develop." Megan felt a flush of pride on behalf of Pine Valley. "It's been a community-wide effort," she acknowledged, "but it started with a moment of compassion that changed how people saw the situation. That's often how the most significant changes begin," Mark observed. "A single moment that shifts perspective." He glanced at Jamie, who was now showing his pendant to another child who had approached. "I understand your concerns about privacy and protecting your son from too much attention. If you're open to it, the melting snows of March brought renewed life to Pine Valley. Tiny green shoots pushed through the damp earth, and the forest echoed with birdsong as nesting season began. 4 months had passed since the Christmas festival, and winter's quiet contemplation had given way to the bustling energy of spring. For Jamie, now nearly 1 year old, these changes were a source of endless fascination. His vocabulary had expanded dramatically over the winter months, though his sentences remained charmingly simple. Every day brought new discoveries in the backyard, a robin building her nest, crocuses pushing through the last patches of snow, puddles perfect for splashing. But his most persistent question through the lengthening days remained the same. "Bear Mama wake up?" Megan had explained repeatedly that bears usually emerged from hibernation in April, but the concept of time remained fluid for Jamie. To his toddler's mind, spring meant the bears would wake, and March's thaw meant spring had arrived. On this particular Saturday morning, as Jamie helped Ryan plant flower bulbs in their garden, the familiar sound of Ranger Cortez's truck approaching their driveway sent the child rushing toward the front yard with muddy hands and unbridled excitement. "Ranger Lisa," he called, bouncing on his toes as the vehicle came to a stop. "Bear Mama wake up now?" The ranger emerged from her truck with a wide smile, dressed in field gear rather than her formal uniform. "Not just yet, wildlife guardian," she replied, using the title that never failed to make Jamie stand a little taller. "But very soon. That's actually why I've come to see you today." Ryan joined them, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Good to see you, Lisa. What brings you out this way?" "I've got a special invitation for the Foster family," she explained, as Megan appeared on the porch. "In about 2 weeks, we'll be conducting our first spring monitoring of the wildlife corridor where your bears were relocated. We're checking how all the animals are doing after winter, including looking for signs that mother bears and their cubs have emerged from hibernation." Jamie's eyes widened. "See Bear Mama?" The ranger crouched to his level. "We probably won't see her directly. Bears are very good at avoiding humans. But we might find tracks, marking trees, or even get lucky with some trail camera footage." She glanced up at Megan and Ryan. "I thought your family might like to join me for the day. It's beautiful country, and it would give Jamie a chance to see the habitat where the bears live now." Megan exchanged a quick glance with Ryan, seeing her own enthusiasm mirrored in his expression. Both of them had been curious about the bears, new territory, and the educational value for Jamie would be significant. "We'd love to," Megan confirmed, to Jamie's obvious delight. "When exactly were you thinking?" 2 weeks from today. The spring monitoring is a full weekend event with various teams in different sectors. I'll be checking the Eastern Valley where your bears were released. She pulled a folded map from her pocket. It's about a 90-minute drive, then a moderate 2-mile hike. The terrain isn't too challenging, but there are some streaming crossings and rocky sections. Do you think Jamie could manage it? Ryan nodded confidently. He's been hiking with us since he could barely walk. We have a child carrier backpack for when he gets tired, but these days he insists on doing most trails himself. "Bear Mama home," Jamie stated with certainty, patting the medallion he still wore faithfully around his neck. "Jamie visit." "That's right," the ranger confirmed with a serious nod. "We're going to visit their forest, but we'll be very quiet and respectful because it's their home, not ours." After discussing logistics and necessary equipment, the ranger left Jamie with a special wildlife journal for recording his observations. During the upcoming expedition, the child immediately declared it his bear book and insisted on practicing his drawings of bears, trees, and tracks. The next 2 weeks passed with excruciating slowness for Jamie, who asked daily whether it was time to visit the bears yet. Megan created a special calendar with 14 boxes for him to mark off each night before bed, helping him understand how time was passing. When the appointed Saturday finally arrived, Jamie was awake before dawn, fully dressed in his hiking clothes and sitting expectantly at the breakfast table when his parents stumbled down at 6 o'clock. "Bear Mama today," he announced, clutching his wildlife journal and pencil. The drive to the wildlife corridor's eastern entrance took them through increasingly remote countryside. As they left the main highway for Forest Service roads, cell phone reception disappeared and the landscape became more rugged. Tall pines crowded close to the roadside, occasionally opening into breathtaking vistas of distant mountains still capped with snow. Ranger Cortez was waiting at the trailhead alongside 2 other wildlife department staff, a biologist named Miguel, who specialized in large predators, and a field technician named Zoe, who managed the trail camera network. After introductions, the ranger outlined their plan for the day. "We'll follow the main trail for about a mile, then branch off to..." Check several monitoring stations. We've got 5 trail cameras to service in this sector, and Miguel will be looking for signs of bear activity. Scat, claw marks on trees, disturbed logs, that sort of thing. Jamie listened with rapt attention, his small hand gripping Megan's tightly. The forest here was different from the woods around Pine Valley, older, wilder somehow, with massive trees that blocked much of the morning sunlight and an understory thick with ferns and berry bushes. "This is prime bear habitat," Miguel explained as they set off down the trail. "Plenty of food sources, water and shelter. The valley has natural boundaries, mountains to the north and east, a river to the south, that help keep the bears within the protected area." The hike proceeded at a leisurely pace, with frequent stops for Jamie to examine interesting rocks, unusual plants, or signs of wildlife. Zoe proved especially good with the child, kneeling beside him to explain deer tracks in soft mud or identify birds by their calls. At the first trail camera, about 40 minutes into their hike, Ranger Cortez demonstrated how they collected the memory cards and replaced the batteries. "Each camera is triggered by motion," she explained. "When an animal walks by, it takes a series of photographs." "Bear mama picture?" Jamie asked hopefully. "We won't know until we get back to the office and check the cards," the ranger replied. "But this particular camera has captured bears before." Miguel, who had been examining the area around the camera, called them over to a nearby tree. "Look at this," he said, pointing to deep parallel grooves in the bark about 4 feet from the ground. "Fresh bear claw marks, probably made within the last week." "Is it our bear?" Ryan asked, as Jamie stared wide-eyed at the evidence of bear activity. Miguel smiled. "We can't be certain without DNA analysis, but the height is consistent with an adult female black bear. And look here at the base of the tree." He pointed to several long, dark hairs caught in the rough bark. "Bear hair, almost certainly from rubbing against the tree." "Bear mama was here," Jamie whispered with absolute conviction. As they continued along the trail, signs of spring were everywhere. Trillium pushing up through the leaf litter, a pair of squirrels chasing each other through the branches overhead, countless bird calls filling the forest with sound. At a small stream crossing, Zoe helped Jamie identify salamander eggs attached to submerged rocks, transparent jellies containing developing embryos. The second and third trail cameras yielded no immediate signs of bear activity, though Miguel pointed out fresh deer tracks and showed Jamie how to identify where turkeys had scratched through the leaf litter, searching for food. Around midday, they reached a small clearing beside a larger stream where fallen logs provided natural seating. For a lunch break, Jamie, who had been hiking remarkably well for his age, was beginning to show signs of fatigue, though his enthusiasm remained undimmed. As they unpacked their sandwiches, Ranger Cortez suddenly held up a hand for silence, her head tilted in the attitude of intense listening. The group froze, and then they heard it, a faint rustling in the underbrush across the stream, too substantial to be caused by a squirrel or bird. "Stay very still," the ranger whispered, slowly raising her binoculars. "Something's moving over there." For 30 breathless seconds, no one made a sound. Even Jamie seemed to understand the importance of stillness, his small hand finding Megan's and squeezing tightly. Then at the edge of the clearing about 50 yards away, a flash of movement resolved into a familiar shape. A black bear cub, probably around 15 months old, emerged briefly from the undergrowth, sniffed the air, and promptly disappeared back into the bushes. "Bear baby," Jamie breathed, his voice barely audible. Miguel nodded, keeping his voice to a whisper. "Looks like a yearling, born last winter and just emerging from its first hibernation." Could it be? Megan didn't need to finish the question. The ranger lowered her binoculars, her expression cautiously excited. "We're in the right general area where your bears were released. The size and age would match, but we'd need better visuals to confirm." "Where's the mother?" Ryan asked, instinctively pulling Jamie closer. "Nearby, certainly," Miguel replied. "Cubs this age stay with their mothers for another season at least. She's probably within calling. Distance but hanging back." They remained completely still for several more minutes, but the cub didn't reappear. Eventually, Ranger Cortez suggested they continue with their lunch, but quietly, keeping voices low and movements minimal. "This is actually perfect," she explained softly. "We've confirmed bear activity in this section without disturbing them. Now we know to check the next trail camera extra carefully. It's positioned about a quarter-mile downstream, where this clearing narrows back into forest." Jamie could barely contain his excitement, though he made a heroic effort to stay quiet as instructed. He opened his wildlife journal and carefully drew what he had seen, a small black shape at the edge of the trees. Underneath, with Megan's help, he wrote, "Bear baby at the stream." After lunch, they continued downstream, moving with greater caution now that they knew bears were active in the area. The fourth trail camera was mounted on a tree overlooking a natural pinch point, where the stream narrowed and any animals following the waterway would likely pass. As Zoe serviced the camera, Miguel examined the soft earth along the stream bank. "Look at this," he said quietly, pointing to a large paw print clearly visible in the mud. Next to it was a smaller, similar print, unmistakably a mother bear and cub. "These are very fresh," he continued. "Made this morning, I'd guess. The stream hasn't had time to erode the edges." Jamie knelt carefully beside the tracks, his face a picture of wonder. Slowly, reverently, he reached out a small finger and traced the air just above the larger print, not touching, but following. "Its outline, bear mama," he whispered. The ranger crouched beside him. "That's right, Jamie, and what do you notice about these tracks compared to the ones we saw earlier from deer and turkey?" Jamie studied the prints seriously. "Bear mama has 5 fingers, he declared after a moment. "Like people." "Excellent observation," the ranger praised. "Bears have 5 toes on each foot, and they walk flat-footed like humans, which is why their tracks sometimes look a little like a person's footprint." Zoe approached with the memory card from the camera. "This one's been triggered multiple times in the past week," she reported. "Could have some good footage." They continued to the 5th and final camera, finding more bear signs along the way. A partially dismantled log where a bear had been searching for insects, several marking trees with fresh claw marks, and scat that Miguel identified as belonging to an adult female bear based on size and content. By the time they began the return journey, Jamie was visibly tired, and Ryan lifted him into the child carrier backpack. From this elevated position, the toddler maintained his vigilant watch of the surrounding forest, pointing out interesting sights and whispering observations to his father. As they approached the trailhead in the late afternoon, Ranger Cortez gathered them for a final conversation. "I want to thank you all for coming today. Your help checking the monitoring stations was valuable, and I think we've collected some excellent data on post-hibernation activity in this sector." "When will you know if it was our bears we saw signs of?" Megan asked, the question that had been on all their minds throughout the afternoon. "Zoe and I will download the camera footage tomorrow at the field office. We can compare the images with the identification records we have from when these particular bears were relocated. If we get clear shots, we should be able to confirm whether it's the same mother and cub." Jamie, who had been dozing against Ryan's shoulder, perked up at this. "See bear mama pictures?" The ranger smiled. "If we find good images of your bears, I promise to send them to your parents right away." Back at the parking area, they said their goodbyes to Miguel and Zoe, promising to stay in touch about the wildlife education program that was now in development. Jamie insisted on a careful inspection of his wildlife journal before leaving, making sure all his observations and drawings were properly recorded. During the drive home, with Jamie fast asleep in his car seat, Megan and Ryan discussed the day's experiences in hushed voices. "Even if those weren't our specific bears," Ryan said, "it was incredible to see how well they've adapted to life in the protected corridor. All those signs of healthy bear activity." Megan nodded. "I keep thinking about what would have happened if things had gone differently that day in the clearing. If Jamie hadn't approached the bear, if people hadn't changed their minds about helping her." "But they did," Ryan said simply. "Because of our son, they did. And now we have a whole community transformed, a model program developing for other towns, and bears living safely in protected habitat." 3 days later, an email arrived from Ranger Cortez with the subject line, "Confirmation your bears." Attached were several clear images from the trail cameras, showing a healthy adult female black bear and her cub moving through the forest. In one particularly striking photograph, the mother bear was standing on her hind legs, examining something on a tree, her face clearly visible to the camera, while her cub waited at the base of the trunk. "We've confirmed through marking patterns and the notch in her right ear that this is indeed the same mother bear from Pine Valley," the ranger wrote. "Her cub has grown tremendously and appears to be in excellent health. They're exploring their territory extensively now that hibernation is over, and based on the multiple camera triggers, they seem to be well established in this sector of the corridor." That evening, Megan sat with Jamie on the porch swing, showing him the photographs on her tablet. The child's face glowed with happiness as he recognized his bears, now free and thriving in their forest home. "Bear Mama remember Jamie?" he asked, touching his medallion thoughtfully. Megan hugged him close. "I think she might," she answered honestly. "Animals remember important things, and you helped her when she needed it most." Jamie nodded, satisfied with this answer. "Jamie remember Bear Mama always," he declared, then pointed to the last photo where the mother bear and cub were walking side by side along the stream bank. "They happy now?" As twilight settled over Pine Valley, bringing the first stars into view above the darkening mountains, Megan reflected on the extraordinary journey they had taken since that autumn day in the clearing. A simple act of childlike compassion had rippled outward, touching and transforming an entire community, creating sanctuary for wild creatures and demonstrating that even the youngest among us could be teachers of profound wisdom. In Jamie's innocent reaching out to a suffering creature, he had reminded them all of a fundamental truth so easily forgotten in adulthood, that kindness transcends boundaries, even those between species. By seeing not a dangerous predator but a mother in need, he had opened eyes and hearts throughout Pine Valley. Now, as spring renewal swept through the mountains, bringing new life and fresh beginnings, the legacy of that moment continued to grow and flourish, just like the bears themselves, moving freely through their forest home under the watchful protection of those who had once feared them. Summer arrived in Pine Valley with an explosion of wildflowers and the cheerful chaos of tourist season. The town had gained unexpected fame as a model for wildlife conservation. 5 years later, Jamie, now 6 years old, stood proudly beside Mayor Edwards at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for Pine Valley's expanded Wildlife Education Center. Around his neck hung the same bear paw medallion, a reminder of that fateful day. "I still remember Bear Mama," Jamie told the gathered crowd. "She taught us that animals aren't our enemies, they're just trying to live like us." Ranger Cortez presented the latest trail camera footage showing the now adult cub with cubs of her own. The compassion of one small child had created a legacy of protection that would benefit generations of wildlife. As Jamie pressed the ceremonial scissors into the ribbon, Megan smiled. From crisis to transformation, their journey had come full circle. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe for more tales of compassion and connection between humans and wildlife.